I know you're wanting to listen to this episode of the Comics Alternative, but before we get started, let me just remind you guys that it's the gift-giving season. Now, that may be obvious, but one of the things that's not so obvious is that you can get all of your stuff and help out the podcast by going to comicsalternative.com/Amazon. Click through on our Amazon banner that you find on that page, and whatever you get during that visit to Amazon, the Comics Alternative will get a few cents kickback. So, whether it be Hanukkah, Christmas, Kwanzaa, or Festivus, get your gifts through our Amazon Associate link. It's a smart way to get your books, and you'll be helping out the podcast. And isn't that what the holiday season is all about? Helping our podcast. This is the Comics Alternative, episode 165, a publisher spotlight on Locust Moon Press. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative. I'm Derek.
And I'm Andy, and we're two guys with PhDs talking about comics.
And on this episode, we're going to be taking a close look at recent publications from Locust Moon Press. And in fact, this will be the last publisher spotlight of 2015. But before we get to a discussion of those books, we want to let all of you guys know that this episode of the Comics Alternative is brought to you by the wonderful folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There you're going to find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off of the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you'll find that those discounts are 20 to 35% off of the cover price, and every single month you're going to find some great specials. And this being the season of giving, DCB Service is giving you a lot of deals. Now, sometimes you'll find that those deals are prices that are 45% off cover price, sometimes 50% off the cover price, but often you're going to find discounts that go higher from there.
And as you've come to expect, DCB Service has tons of bundles, and December is no exception. You go there and you're going to find a Vertigo bundle, which is the 11 newest Vertigo issues for 50% off. You will also find a Valiant bundle, the 7 newest Valiant titles for 50% off. And Derek, this is kind of cool for those Neil Adams fans out there. There is the Neil Adams variant bundle. All 26 DC Neil Adams variant issues. That one's at 45% off. That's a lot of Neil Adams.
That's a lot of Neil. More Neil than you know what to do with.
Yep.
Yeah, but, for some people, you just can't have enough Neil. And where do you get your Neil? At Discount Comic Book Service. That's right. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. And after you do get your comics there, please be sure to send them an email and tell them that the two guys with PhDs sent you.
That's right. Tell them I want my Neil.
It's kind of like the old I want my MTV campaign from back in the early 80s.
Yeah, swinging the phone. Was that David Bowie, or was it the Police, or both?
Well, I remember the Police did it.
And, the Police, yeah.
And there were other acts who did the little promo bit as well. I just can't remember who. It's been a while.
It has been a while.
Yeah, it does age us.
Yeah.
Well, something that doesn't age us is getting new information. Actually, that's probably a lousy attempt at a segue, but I'll go with it anyhow. But no, we have some announcements to make to our listening public.
Cool.
Now, the first bit of news we want to share with you guys is that we have a new editor for the Comics Alternative blog, Paul Lai. He's someone who has been a listener, a very dedicated listener of the show for a while. And in fact, Andy, if you remember, back earlier this year, he sent us an email pointing out the great combination that you and I make on the show. Remember earlier this year you were filling in for quite a number of weeks back in the late spring when Kunka couldn't make it. He had other things going on. Yeah. And then Paul was the one who emailed us to say that he really liked having you on the show. Not to diss Kunka, but he said he liked the exchange between the two of us.
Yeah, and Paul is really a great guy, not just because he likes me being on the show, which is nice, but, ever since then, I've kind of kept up with him, and, he's got a lot of great stuff on his Multiversity website, and recently we mentioned him during the Thanksgiving episode, the great essay that he did on Peanuts, the comic strip Peanuts. So, yeah, I'm super excited to have Paul on board, and, I can't wait to see all the great stuff he's going to do.
Yeah. Now, Paul is a PhD candidate in language, literacy, and culture at UC Berkeley in their Graduate School of Education. And, you've mentioned that he's done reviews for multiversitycomics.com, and now he is going to be the new editor of the Comics Alternative blog. Now, this is something that I had been doing for the past, I guess not quite 3 years since we've been putting up reviews to supplement our podcast episodes. And it's not backbreaking work, but with the number of episodes that we're doing for the podcast, and it has grown almost exponentially this year, that's what really consumes a lot of time. And so finding someone else to take on certain tasks, I think, is a great thing. And also it's going to bring in new blood, and we're really hoping that Paul will not only work well with the people who have been reviewing for us in the past, like you, but also bring in new blood.
Yeah, this is really exciting. And again, welcome, Paul, and we look forward to working with you.
That's right. And in fact, Paul, I will put his contact information up on the website very soon, if not by the time that this episode goes up. If you want to get in touch with him about the blog, maybe you're interested in writing some pretty darn serious reviews, because that's what we're into at the Comics Alternative. You can get in touch with him at paul@comicsalternative.com. Now, another bit of news, Andy, is our end of the year episode of the Comics Alternative. This is something that Kunka and I have been doing from the very beginning. We use the very last episode of the year, and this year that Wednesday is December 30th. So on December 30th, our final show of 2015 will go up, and in that episode, Kunka and I will share what each of us consider some of the best comics, series, original graphic novels, archival collections, what have you, from the past year. And each of us chooses 10, and we don't share our list with each other. So I know that you and Gwen just did a fabulous best of 2015 show that went up last week. The show for young readers. And I know that you guys, I think you shared your list right before recording, so you know that there was a little overlap.
Yeah, and we weren't going to share our lists, but we decided, if we do, and the ones that we did share, we wanted to talk about together. So we decided to share. But I'm glad you guys are going to keep it close to the vest until it's time to actually reveal them.
Yeah, we keep it secret because sometimes there have been big surprises where something that one of us would assume the other one would choose for their top 10 list is not there, or vice versa. That something will be on my list or Andy's list, and when one of us finds out that the other has that, it's like, that's I never thought of that. But so we have that coming up on the 30th, and the reason I wanted to mention this is not so much in way of teaser, but there's that as well. But we'd like to hear from you guys, our listeners, of what you consider the best of 2015. Now, you can let us know this. You can, email us, as many of you have in the past. You can also let us know on Facebook, on Twitter. But I plan on putting up something in the forum about best of the past year. So maybe you can chime in on the forum.
Yeah, and that would be great. Derek, like you said, listeners probably might, they could bring up something that we're not aware of that, slipped under our radar. Because like you said, that's one of the great things about doing the show is, finding things that, maybe we missed in all the busyness and craziness of things.
That's right. In fact, there are a lot of things that could conceivably be on my top 10 list that I will not have had time to read by the time we actually record it. So, yeah, we'd like to hear from you guys. And like I said, whether it be on Twitter, Facebook, or even our forum, let us know. And in fact, on the topic of our forum, maybe we should find someone who is willing to oversee our forum and breathe new life into it, kind of like Paul is going to be breathing new life into our blog.
Yeah,
because,
good idea.
Yeah, I don't maintain the forum as much as I could. I'm not as much of a cheerleader for that. And again, it comes back to time.
Right.
A few other things before we get into our Locust Moon episode. We got a correction last week from the November episode that Shay and I did for our monthly manga series. We got a tweet. Okay, if you remember, we focused on 2 books. We looked at Suguru Mizuki's Hitler and then Osamu Tezuka's Message to Adolf. Now, after the show went up, Zach Davison tweeted us and said, "I really love your show, guys. Great job. However, I'd like to point out that I, and not Fred Schott, is the translator of Hitler." And I think I on the show had mentioned that Schott was the translator. Now, what Fred Schott has done in not only Mizuki's Hitler, but in other Mizuki books as well, is to write the introduction to the volumes. And so I had mistakenly said that Schott was the translator, but he wasn't. Jack Davison is, and in fact, Davison also did the translation to that massive Showa series. So, Zach, thank you very much for sending in that correction. I'm glad you weren't pissed off that we didn't give you the credit that you deserved. But actually, an interesting little back and forth resulted from Davison's tweet, because then he got, I think, Fred Schott into the loop, and we talked back and forth for a while.
Well, that's good. And we do make mistakes, and it's always good to have listeners, kind of saying, "Hey, you guys missed one."
Exactly.
So, yeah, thanks.
Yeah. We also got a message from someone that we've had on the show before, Hector Rodriguez. Now, back in June of this year, I met Hector at the Fan Expo Dallas Con and talked with him for the show. So he and I were talking about a series that he had created called El Peso Hero, and who is a Latino hero, crime fighter. And one of the great things about that title is that not only does he bring in Latino culture, Spanish language, and that larger context of culture and ethnicity, but also it's rather timely because I specifically back in June asked him about issues of, let's say, immigration, xenophobia that we were just starting to see the tip of the iceberg of over the summer, and I think this came out. I met him right before Donald Trump announced that he was throwing his hat into the race. So, it's a very timely title as well. And Hector got in touch with us to say that he currently has a new Kickstarter going on for this next series of El Peso Hero comics called El Peso Hero Undocumented Hero. So we strongly recommend that you go to Kickstarter and search for the name Hector Rodriguez or El Paso Hero, and you will quickly and easily find this Kickstarter campaign. It's definitely worth checking out. He's got a great video. It really does introduces the hero and explain what he's doing in the series. And this is important. In fact, Hector has gotten quite a bit of attention from the press about his the creation of El Peso Hero. So definitely check that out, and good luck, Hector, on that Kickstarter campaign.
Yes, best of luck.
Yes. So, Andy, you ready to get into some Locust Moon Press books?
I'm ready. Let's do some Locust Moon.
Now, we've got 4 titles that you and I are going to be discussing. These are the fall releases from Locust Moon Press. We're going to start with an anthology called Prometheus Eternal. And then after that, we're going to look at Quarter Moon, and this is issue number 6, I believe. It's subtitled Impractical Cats, and Quarter Moon it's a quarterly, as the title suggests, that has work from a variety of different creators. After that, we're going to look at Shaman, and this is a work written by Ben Kahn with art by Bruno de Galgo. And then we're going to wrap up with another collection from a variety of different creators, and this is Little Nemo's Big New Dreams. So we have a lot on our plate today, but before we get to that plate, let's listen to a brief conversation that I had with the publisher of Locust Moon Press, Josh O'Neill. I spoke with Josh earlier, and in fact, listeners or subscribers to the podcast will notice that what they're about to hear actually went up yesterday on Tuesday as kind of a teaser, and also to let our listeners know, give them a little more cushion time so that they could take part in another Kickstarter campaign that Locust Moon has going on right now, and that is one for The Lost Work of Will Eisner. That ends in a couple of days on December 10th. So as you'll hear from this conversation, Josh describes what the Will Eisner Project is all about, and also what these books are all about, and introduces everyone to Locust Moon Press.
Cool. Let's hear it.
I'm happy to be talking with Josh O'Neill. He is one of the guys behind Locust Moon Press. Josh, thanks for being on the Comics Alternative.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Derek.
Now, you and I met a few months ago at Small Press Expo, and I had known about Locust Moon Press at the time, but I remember at the table, and I think it was that last day, I probably should have talked to you on that Saturday, but it was on a Sunday, where we had a pretty good conversation, and that's where the idea for this Publisher Spotlight actually came about.
Yeah, that's right. I remember meeting you there.
Yeah, and you were telling me quite a bit more about Locust Moon than I had already known. So one of the things I want you to do, if you could, is to describe to our listeners what Locust Moon Press is.
Well, Locust Moon Press is a small press based in Philadelphia. We've put out 12 books over the last about 2.5 years. And I'll sort of tell you the story of how we first got going. It's sort of interesting. It was a very sort of organic thing that happened in Philly here. My partner Chris and I, Chris, who's the creative director of Locust Moon, we met back in 2009 working at a local comic shop that was kind of flailing and starting to go out of business. But we met each other. We were both sort of involved in trying to make comics at the time, both as writers and editors. But it's sort of, I was at the very beginning of trying to do that stuff. Chris had been doing it for a few years. But when that shop was starting to go out of business, we had always dreamed of having our own comic shop. And we were always talking about what we thought we could do differently than the shop we were working at right then. So when they closed down, we decided to start our own shop. And a big part of our goal was to have it really be this creative base for artists and writers and storytellers of all kinds. So we really started building this community of local Philadelphia artists, bringing people in for signings and stuff. And around the same time, we started working together with a guy who was at the time a customer of ours, became a great friend, and now is our partner, Andrew Carl, who's the editor-in-chief of Locust Moon Press. We started working with him on a book called Once Upon a Time Machine, which was a giant anthology of science fiction fairy tales that we put together. The idea is you take the world's oldest stories and adapt them into infinite futuristic settings. So that was a big anthology project, which was very grassroots. Most of the people involved with it had not been published anywhere, but there's over 50 artists in the book, all unbelievably talented. And so putting that book together, which took us several years, and came out in 2012, Dark Horse published it for us. That was kind of our first taste of not just making comics, but publishing comics, packaging comics, working with lots of creators, editing. So it was sort of an addiction from us from there on out. And as the last few years have gone by, we've put out more and more stuff. We did a book last year called Little Nemo, Dream Another Dream, which was a giant, I mean, literally and figuratively giant 16 by 21 inch broadsheet newspaper size tribute to Winsor McCay, which we asked 140 amazing cartoonists to do their own Little Nemo strips in their own style. And it features a lot of the most amazing cartoonists on the planet, people like Paul Pope and Mike Allred and J.H. Williams and Dennis Kitchen and Jeremy Bastian and Craig Thompson. And I mean, the list just goes on and on. And we ran a Kickstarter to fund our self-publishing of that book, which was super successful. We were trying to raise $50,000 and we raised $150,000. And the book just came out beautifully, and it won a bunch of awards. It won 2 Eisner Awards and a Harvey Award. And so we've just been slowly trying to grow this small comics press, and it's been going pretty well so far.
Yeah, in fact, you mentioned Little Nemo, Dream Another Dream. That's actually how I first found out about you guys. It was only afterwards that I learned about Once Upon a Time Machine, but I was... I can't remember which one it was, but I was listening to a podcast, and a comics podcast, another one, and someone mentioned having just recently gotten a hold of Dream Another Dream, that they were a Kickstarter supporter, and the way he was describing it, basically gushing over it, I thought, oh my God, this is something I ought to check out. And, by that point, it was too late to get it on the Kickstarter. Then I saw, how big it was, both in terms of its literal size and, I mean, it is quite a package. And I thought, I think I learned about it right before the holidays. I said, I don't know if I should put my family's Christmas at, in jeopardy. But it's something that, I started to salivate over. And then... it was nominated for awards, started getting awards, and so it has been quite a hit over the past year.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a huge thing for us. It's opened so many doors for us in this industry, and we were just so proud to be able to work with all these brilliant people. And I mean, when you have this gigantic page that people are working with, cartoonists don't get the chance to work at 16 by 21 very often, and they're working in tribute to this massive outsized influence of Winsor McCay. You get the very best work out of people who never do less than amazing work. I mean, all the people in the book, including, from the superstar well-known creators to the more obscure, younger, less known people, are all just absolutely brilliant. I mean, to me, the greatness of the book is that it just shows the true breadth of possibility in the comics industry, the different ways of telling stories. And so, giving these people this opportunity to do this amazing stuff was really just such an honor.
Now, one of the Kickstarter campaigns I was able to be a part of is the one that you have going on right now, and I'm really excited about this, The Lost Work of Will Eisner. And when this episode goes up, there will be 2 or 3 days for our listeners to be a part of this, so they can support this on Kickstarter as well. So describe what this is to our listeners.
Well, this is a fascinating story. There's a collector just outside Philly in New Jersey who discovered printing plates of mid-1930s Will Eisner comic strips, comics that predate any known comics that he created in his career. This is stuff that no one has ever seen before, outside of a few of the strips have been reprinted. A few were reprinted in the 1930s. A few were printed in local newspapers because Eisner and Jerry Iger were trying to syndicate them at the time. But the majority of this material has never been seen by anybody before. And it's stuff that Eisner drew when he was a teenager. And you can literally see him figuring out how to become Will Eisner in real time. It's one of the most interesting things I've ever seen. Just you can see he's aping these different comic artists that he admires. He's trying on different styles, And then as the strips go along, one of them is a one-off series of gag strips called Uncle Otto. The other is a serialized kind of spy adventure strip called Harry Carey. And you can see him just starting to blend these influences and take this sort of, it's kind of derivative stuff when it starts out, but you can see him starting to become the guy who just a few years later would create the Spirit. Because Eisner, there's so little of his early stuff that anyone's ever seen. We sort of always picture him as the fully formed comic creator he was by his early 20s. I mean, by the time he was 20, he was a genius. Mm-hmm. But in these strips, you can see him finding his way to that voice, and it sheds a whole new light on the career of this amazing artist. So we could not be more excited to be doing that project. I mean, when I remember, so we run this comic shop in Philly, and it was through a customer of ours that we found out about this stuff. He told us his friend had these amazing strips. He had bought this gigantic collection of almost 10,000 1930s printing plates, and when he bought them, he didn't know what was in there. He just knew there was a lot of interesting cartoon stuff, because the strips are not credited to Will Eisner. He was drawing a bunch of stuff at that time, and he and Jerry Iger had this sort of fledgling syndicate or wannabe syndicate. And so they would work under assumed names to give the impression there were lots of cartoonists working for the syndicate. Mm-hmm. So one of the strips was under the name Willis B. Renzi, which is Eisner backwards. The other one is Carl Heck. So this guy, Joe Getzinger, who we got this material from, he figured out, oh my God, this is Will Eisner material. And so when Rich Green, who was our customer who put us together with Joe, told us about this stuff, it just sounded too good to be true. So immediately we just dropped everything and ran over to Jersey, and man, there it was. So it's been an adventure. It's been a real sort of detective story putting this stuff together.
Yeah, well, it's fascinating how you guys got a hold of these lost comics of Eisner's through a customer who knew someone, Getzinger, who actually had purchased those plates. Now, why the decision to take this, like Little Nemo, Dream Another Dream, to Kickstarter instead of publishing it like you did, let's say, Once Upon a Time, or some of your current ones now, like Shaman?
Well, yeah, I mean, we sort of do two different things. Some books we self-publish, other books we package for other companies, like Once Upon a Time Machine we did for Dark Horse, and we did an abridged edition of the Little Nemo book for Toon Books. But when it comes to crowdfunding, which I think is an amazing thing that's opening doors to independent publishers that never would have existed before, the stuff that I sort of think is most favored by crowdfunding is stuff that has sort of this element of wanting to do something great for the whole medium. You know, I mean, the Little Nemo thing was such a loving tribute to Winsor McCay, and anybody who loves Little Nemo would love that book. And people who don't know about Little Nemo will likely find out about Little Nemo because of a lot of their favorite cartoonists being in that book. So it really was like, it was a passion project, and it was a real sort of grassroots effort to do this great thing to honor the memory of Winsor McCay. And similarly, I mean, we look at this Eisner book as a real kind of service to art history and comics history, to expand the understanding of one of the very few most important cartoonists of all time. It's not a gigantic transformative effect on the understanding of Eisner, but if you care about Will Eisner, reading these comics will change your perception of him somewhat and expand it. So we think it's this important thing, and I know a lot of people love Eisner the same way we do. So we really thought that we would get a lot of support, and we have. We've already been. We were only trying to raise 20,000. We're already over 40,000. So it's been a really beautiful thing. Seeing my favorite thing about crowdfunding is seeing all these passionate people come together around something, and so it's a very beautiful experience.
Yeah, I know on our recent Thanksgiving show, every year we do a special Thanksgiving episode where the co-hosts and I, all of us get together and we discuss what we're thankful for in terms of comics. And this year,
that's lovely.
Will Eisner Kickstarter campaign came up as one of the things we're really thankful for this year.
That's great. I love it.
So, and we will put up a link for this Kickstarter campaign in our show notes. So there's that. But we're going to be talking on this episode about 4 of your recent publications. I guess these are the fall releases. Now, speaking of, as we have earlier, Little Nemo, the book that we're going to be discussing, Little Nemo's Big New Dreams. Now, those are selections from that larger book from last year?
Yes, it's about a quarter of the material in the larger book. It was put out by Toon Books, which is Françoise Mouly's beautiful line of children's books, which she's now just launched what's called Toon Graphics, which is a new line of kind of books aimed at middle school aged kids. And so our idea is to try to get this into schools and libraries, educate people about McKay and about cartooning and animation history. So it has a little bit more, it has more McKay material in there, more essays and contextual information and stuff like that. Plus, it's, just a much smaller, cheaper edition for people who don't have the kind of disposable income to drop $125 in a comic book.
Yeah, and plus, size-wise, it's much more manageable. It will not crush children.
Right, exactly. You can take it on a picnic with you.
Yeah.
You can take it on an airplane with you.
Yeah.
We actually had somebody bought the Little Nemo book and brought it back to Canada with them, and they sent us a photo of themselves reading it on an airplane. I was like, how'd you even get that on there?
Yeah, they may be put on terrorist lists to maybe seen as a weapon.
Yeah.
And also issue number 6 of Quarter Moon is out. Now, This is an anthology that you guys have been publishing since 2013. So what can you tell us about the Quarter Moon anthology?
Well, it's this magazine series that we've been growing. It started off really just as a way of, we're working in the shop all the time. We do all these events. We're surrounded by all these amazing cartoonists, and we're doing all these book projects. But they're largely very ambitious, big things that take years to gestate, and we have to sort of figure out piece by piece. And there are often several years from conception to getting them out on the shelves. And we just wanted to do something where we could work with more of the people we love and have sort of a constant flow of new material coming out. So we do these themed comic anthologies on a roughly quarterly schedule. Very roughly, but we've done 6 issues. The 7th is about to come out, and they've been getting better and better, in my opinion. We've been working with more and more amazing people. The last issue was cat themed, so people are really into it for that reason, and just because of how many amazing cartoonists are in there, like Paul Pope and David Mack and Ron Wimberly and Lisk Fang and a ton of other incredible people. Dean Haspiel's in there.
Yeah, it's jam-packed with names. And then the other 2 that are part of your fall releases, there is Shaman by Ben Kahn and Bruno Hidalgo.
Yes.
And then there's another collection with a variety of different artists, and that is Prometheus Eternal. In fact, you were talking with me about this at SPX.
Yeah, I mean, that was a fascinating project. That's a collaboration that we did with the Philadelphia Museum of Art. Which they commissioned it as part of an exhibition that's currently running. It's about to end in 10 days, I think. The exhibition is called Wrath of the Gods, and it takes the famous Rubens Prometheus Bound painting, the giant painting where Prometheus is hanging upside down, getting his guts eaten out by the bird. Mm-hmm. It takes that painting and builds kind of historical context around it. So it's that painting and I think 25 other historically connected works, including stuff by Titian and Michelangelo. And so Prometheus Eternal, since this show is built around this sort of concept of artistic inspiration, mythologically Prometheus is the bringer of inspiration and creativity. Our comic is meant to kind of continue that artistic succession. So we got a lot of the greatest cartoonists in the world to do their own adaptations of the Prometheus myth, sort of as filtered through this painting and the other work in this show. And it's only a 24-page comic, but it features work by Grant Morrison, Dave McKean, Paul Pope, David Mack, Bill Sienkiewicz, Farrell Dalrymple, just a stunning list of people, Yuko Shimizu. And the comic itself is actually in the Wrath of the Gods show at the museum, maybe 12 feet away from a Michelangelo drawing, on display as one of the pieces in the show in its stapled and folded form as a comic, which to me is like the greatest coup of Locust Moon's publishing career. The fact that we managed to smuggle all these amazing comic artists into the Philadelphia Museum of Art, one of the greatest art institutions in America. So that was a totally fascinating project.
So, okay, you've talked about you're working on the next issue of Quarter Moon, and of course there's the lost work of Will Eisner's. What other new things can we expect from Locust Moon in 2016?
Well, there's the sequel to Once Upon a Time Machine, which we're doing with Dark Horse, which the first Once Upon a Time Machine was sci-fi adaptations of fairy tales. This one is sci-fi adaptations of Greek mythology. So coincidentally, that happens to go along with the Prometheus book we just did. That wasn't intentional, but that's going to come out from Dark Horse in 2016. We're super, super excited and proud of that one. We're also working on a book, another archival project. It's our second one, a collection of art by a very obscure early 20th century cartoonist named Herbert Crowley, who was one of the great forgotten geniuses of the 20th century. Very little is known about his work or life now. And we're going to do like a biography and gigantic 11 by 17 art book collecting his comics, his paintings, his sculptures, his illustrations, and it's going to absolutely blow people's minds when you see Crowley's work and you realize it was made in 1917, 1919, whatever these paintings and drawings were done. You just can't believe it. He was so far ahead of his time. I mean, completely. It's hard to imagine like Jim Woodring without him. He had such a huge influence, but at the same time, almost nobody knows anything about him. So I think that's going to be another Kickstarter project that we're going to do, and that's going to be our next archival thing. And that's something I've been kind of diving into the research of recently.
So if people want to find out more about you guys, they can go to your website, locustmoon.com. If they want to visit your shop in Philly, where's that located?
It's on 34 South 40th Street, which is between Market and Chestnut. But our shop is actually closing down at the end of the year, and we're transitioning into publishing full-time.
So they can get there before the end of December, and are you doing anything special as you're closing down? Kind of a big bang goodbye.
We are. Yeah, we're gonna do a giant giant farewell party, which I think is going to be December 19th.
So there's that, and even though we're losing your physical brick and mortar shop, we can expect to see more of the output of your press.
Well, yeah, we've been working so hard trying to get these books out there, and just as we've sort of amped things up over the last year. I mean, we put out as many books this past year as we did the last 3 years combined, probably, and it's just started to get to the point where like we're sort of moonlighting as publishers, but starting to have the workload of actual full-time publishers. So we really are looking forward to having this opportunity to focus on trying to get more amazing material out there.
Well, Josh, I want to thank you for talking with us on the Comics Alternative, and we're looking forward to talking about these books.
Oh, thanks so much, Derek. I appreciate you having me.
So there you go, Andy. It was nice talking to Josh. I met him first when you and I were at SPX, but I didn't see him until the tail end of the con on Sunday afternoon. But I did lay the groundwork for doing this Publisher Spotlight when I did see him. So it was great calling him up and talking with him and finding out more about what Locust Moon Press is going to be doing in the future.
Yeah, I'm glad you guys got to talk. And, Locust Moon is one of those presses. I mean, I'd heard a little bit about them, but I had not really read anything until we got ready for this podcast. So I'm really glad that you got to talk to him at SPX on the last day. And course, that we're doing this too.
Exactly. And one of the things that kind of defines 2015 for me in the podcast is we've been doing more shows, either publisher spotlights or even regular review shows, where we will look at the work from these smaller, some call maybe micro presses, and even more distinct is presses that are based out of bookstores.
Yeah.
Now, as Josh mentioned, after the end of this year, Locust Moon Press is going to be closing its doors, the brick and mortar store, but it's still going to be around as a publisher. But there are other books and publishers that we've talked about this year that are very similar to what Locust Moon has going on. So, for instance, we did a publisher spotlight earlier on Big Planet. Big Planet.
Retrofit.
Yep, but Big Planet in the Retrofit comics, but Big Planet is the brick and mortar comic shop.
Right. And they have like 4 locations, I think, near where I live.
Yeah, not too far.
Yeah.
And then we've also done books by Kilgore Books and Comics. Mm-hmm. And that's a physical store, but they also publish. In fact, they're going to be publishing more, to the point that I'm pretty darn sure we're going to do a publisher spotlight on Kilgore in 2016.
Ah.
But right now our task is to talk about Locust Moon Press books. And we're going to start with an interesting collection called Prometheus Eternal. Now, this is what Josh was talking about a little while ago. They did this comic in conjunction with the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And there is a story behind this comic. And that is, what Josh had mentioned, the Paul Rubens' Prometheus Bound, that famous painting. And this becomes not only a comic, but also an art object that is based on and inspired by Rubens' Prometheus Unbound.
Yes. In fact, the piece actually begins with a prose piece by Josh O'Neill about the Greek myth of Prometheus. So if you don't know too much about your Prometheus history, you can get caught up really quick with that essay, which is informative and entertaining.
Exactly. And in fact, facing that introduction where you get the context is a reproduction of the Rubens. So you can see the painting that is being referred to, and of course has been for years at the Philadelphia Museum of Art.
Should we give a little brief introduction of who Prometheus is for listeners who may not know?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, it's one of those figures that, I would think, God, who wouldn't know this? But, you're right. There may be those out there who aren't as up on their myths as they could be. So, yeah, go ahead and introduce.
Well, I think I'm just going to read just a bit from that first essay that's there. This is the ancient Greek myth of the Titan Prometheus, who saw his beloved creation, humankind, suffering in darkness, and took matters into his own hands, stealing fire from Mount Olympus to give us as a gift. The flames warmed our bodies and stirred our souls with the sparks of imagination that fuel creativity. His punishment for this transgression was swift and brutal. Zeus, the king of the gods, chained the immortal Prometheus to a rock atop a mountain, where an eagle devoured his ever-regenerating liver for lifetimes on end. Mm-hmm. So if you don't know, now you know.
Exactly. And all of the comics or illustrations, some are really not comics in the strictest sense, but just one-page illustrations. But everything in this small comic is based on that myth, or I guess more specifically, Rubens' representation of the myth. And we have, let me see, if we do count the reproduction of the Rubens itself, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 contributions to this issue, and that's not counting the front and back cover, which was illustrated by Bill Sienkiewicz. So, and we have a variety of creators, many of whom our listeners will recognize.
Oh, yeah. There's some really heavy hitters here. I mean, you've got Grant Morrison, Dave McKean, Farrell Dalrymple. You've got some
Mack, Paul
David
Pope.
Mack. Yeah, you've got some very recognized names here.
Yeah, exactly. And we should point out that this is not a big, thick book. This is actually comic book sized, and not only in terms of its dimensions, but also its page count. And I'm looking, I don't see any page numbers here, but I mean, this is very much like the traditional comic book. Okay, so whereas the other texts that we're going to be discussing from Locust Moon are books, even the Quarter Moon is in much more book form than anything. But the Prometheus Eternal is a comic book. So, we had mentioned that there are a number of entries, but it's it's a relatively short text that you have here. And some of these entries may be just one page, some are stories that last for several. So you get a wide variety and different kinds of interpretations. There are some adaptations, and I use adaptation kind of in a broad sense, accounting for like the possibility for something that maybe is inspired and it's a spin-off of the Prometheus myth. Some of these are pretty close to the original myth, but then others go off into creative realms that are quite different from Prometheus.
Yeah.
Actually, those are the ones that I really appreciate. I mean, I appreciate all of the entries in Prometheus Eternal, and there's a part of me that hesitates to mention which ones that I like more than others, because they're all good. But I do have preferences.
I do too. And the thing about this is, like we were talking, there's so much diversity in styles here. I mean, the talent in all of these stories and illustrations is just really off the chart. So it's kind of a, there's something for everybody. It's kind of apples and oranges. Everything in here is really, really good. But as you said, some stay a little bit closer to the mythology than others. Some are a little bit more serious. Some are just funny. Some are just laugh out loud funny with some of the things that they do with it. So, there's going to be something for everybody in this. And like you said, Derek, it's just comic book page or comic book sized, a typical comic book. I think the price on this is $5.99. And, for everything that you're getting in here, it's a real deal.
It is. Well, let me ask you, you said you have some favorites. Which ones really stand out for you?
Well, it wasn't really my favorite, but I just like the way the comic starts off. It starts off with Prometheus is Free, written by Grant Morrison and drawn by Farrell Dalrymple. And it's about a painter who's struggling with her art, not really knowing what she's trying to say in her work. And, what every artist, whether it's an actual artist or a writer or whatever, what if I never paint again? And then all of a sudden you have these words that are just bold. Have no fear. Prometheus is here. And you've got this guy in a superhero outfit and flames coming from him and his huge chains around him. And it's just a fun piece with Morrison and Farrell Dalrymple's art is just incredible. If you've never experienced his art before, this is a nice, little sample of what his art is like, very high energy. And you can tell these guys are having just a great time with this. So, it's probably not my favorite piece in here, but it's a really great way to get the book started.
I agree. And, I like this a lot. It's not my favorite, such as, it is with you, or as you said. But I can tell you that this is the one that I was looking forward to the most, because I'm a big fan of Farrell Dalrymple and, gigantic fan of Grant Morrison. So I'm thinking, okay, you can't go wrong by putting those two together. And of course they don't. And I think it's a great story. They're having fun in doing this. And there's some pieces that are a little more serious than humorous. This is a little more on the humorous side. And it's great. A fun exercise in taking the Prometheus myth and seeing what you could do with it, especially within the superhero genre. Others, though, I think kind of stand out a little more for me, and for different reasons. I really like the piece that follows that, the Dave McKeon Prometheus Unheard. But one that struck me in a way that I didn't expect it to is Prometheus Untold by David Mack. I like David Mack's work, but sometimes when I read it, I think, okay, it's fine. It doesn't do anything for me, but I like it well enough. This one I liked quite a bit.
This may be my favorite in the whole book as well, so I'm glad that you mentioned that.
Oh, really? Now, it's not my favorite, but I really like it. So you really like the
I think
Prometheus Untold?
It might be my favorite. It's It's got really, and listeners should know that it's kind of a story told in two wildly diverging styles. You've got this incredible, stunning artwork.
Collage,
representing, or at least I think it represents the gods. And then underneath, there's this very simple line work, which I assume represents humans in a conversation, maybe in a conversation with Prometheus. So you got such a diversity here of just, I mean, the art in the first half of the page, each of these pages, the collages, as you say, they could be in a museum. I mean, they're just absolutely gorgeous, stunning. And then you got this very, very simple line work. It's kind of like the gods and the humans are trying to have this conversation, and the humans are so puny. The little line artwork is the best that we can do. But right. It's really, really great, and it's really got a nice payoff. I'm not gonna tell readers what the payoff is, but I think it's nice.
Oh, really? So you think that's a spoiler? I was going to read, because this is actually in letter form, from humans to Prometheus. You know, it starts off, "Dear Prometheus." I was going to read the letter, but you think it'll be a spoiler?
Yeah, I think you should let readers discover it for themselves.
Okay.
I mean, it wouldn't be a huge spoiler.
Well, if they know the myth, it's not a spoiler.
If they know the myth, yeah, it's not a spoiler.
But I will say that the end of this is a twist of humor.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I really liked about this. But I tell you, my favorite piece in this collection is the one that follows that one, and that is The Gift of Fire. Now, this is by Josh O'Neill himself and Lisk Feng. And I was not familiar with the work of Lisk Feng until preparing for this week's show, because Feng is also in the Little Nemo Big New Dreams book.
That's right. So we'll see more of that.
Yeah, and is he in Quarter Moon as well?
I believe he is in Quarter Moon.
Yes, he is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So we're getting a lot of Feng. Or maybe he's in Quarter Moon and not in Nemo.
Well, he did the cover for Quarter Moon.
Okay. So, but he's not in the Nemo book.
I don't know.
Or at least the one we have. Okay, maybe. Okay, I was thinking about Quarter Moon, but I didn't know about his work before. But I really like this, and one of the things I love about the O'Neill Feng story, The Gift of Fire. This is one of the longest pieces in this collection. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pages long, and it's one of those that is a loose adaptation of Prometheus and the Prometheus myth, because you really don't have Prometheus in this story, really, but it's hinted at. The myth is hinted at,
right.
Because basically it's a story told in retrospect by someone who begins, "I was 6, I can only remember so much," and he tells us about, is it a he or a she? No, it's a girl. It's a she. Yeah, she tells us.
Girl, yeah.
Right. She tells us about her experiences growing up and being with her family, and then at one point, the father, one winter, takes them to Hong Kong. He says, "Okay, I've seen a sign. Let's go." And so he picks up the family who were living in a rural area, and they move to Hong Kong. And it's about the changes that take place there, the changes that take place with her father, and how what happens with him and how they remember him at the end. Very much Prometheus and the Prometheus myth is what's going on here. And I love the way that both O'Neill and Feng use those subtle references to things such as fire and chains and spark of inspiration, things of that sort. And again, they're taking the core of what the Prometheus myth is all about and making it into a wholly new narrative.
I agree. The fire, as you say, the fire is a significant presence in this story in a different way than it is in the other stories. And the thing that I think really, really works so well is, again, as you say, Prometheus as a god is not in this story, but the signs of him are there. And the thing about it that really appeals to me is, like the Prometheus myth, there are consequences to decisions. I mean, the father is saying, "I've seen a sign, we're going to pack up and we're going to leave." And they do that, and there are consequences, again, without giving away too much, for one member of the family in particular, just like the myth. Mm-hmm. There were consequences for Prometheus' Prometheus's decision, and we see the same thing here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really good story.
Yeah. And then the last story in this collection is by James Comey, and it's Foie Gras. It's a one-pager, and this is one of the more humorous pieces in the collection.
Yeah, I that's a great way to end it too. It's a fun piece. Art is really nice. I really liked it too.
Yeah,
but yeah. There's a little bit of everything here. I really liked the Rubens challenging the gods, Rubens becoming Rubens by Andrea Surumi.
Yeah, and that's okay. Maybe that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, that's as long as the other one that I had mentioned. And yeah, I like this one as well.
Yeah, one of the longer ones. Yeah, and it reminded me of a book that we spoke of many months ago, Marx by Corinne Meyer and Anne Simon from Nobrow. Mm-hmm. It kind of has that same art style. It's probably the most, I guess we could say, the most cartoonish of any of the ones in this book. But it's really about Rubens' artistic discovery and how he came to create what he created, and the trials and tribulations of trying to create something. But there's so much humor in it too. There's he's trying to decide. You got to pick a side. Who's it going to be? Is it going to be Michelangelo or somebody else? And they actually have like school pennants and things like that, and signs that say "Danger, falling male nudes." And just fun, you're having a good time with it. But yet, there's probably some truth to it.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned this story, if for no other reason. This is the one piece in this collection that focuses not so much on the painting or the myth, but on Rubens himself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's nice to see that.
Yeah. So, this has me wanting to take a trip up to Philadelphia because, as Josh mentioned, at this exhibit, there is a copy of the comic Prometheus Eternal on exhibition as well. So the comic itself becomes part of the exhibit.
Cool.
It's part of the art. So let's go from one collection to the next. What we're going to talk about now is issue number 6 of Quarter Moon, and this is subtitled Impractical Cats. Now, Andy, I have not, until we prepared for this show, I had not yet read an issue of Quarter Moon. Had you?
No, this is my first.
Yeah, and so I didn't know that, a lot of anthologies that come out every now and again. This one, Quarter Moon, has a theme with every issue. So for number 6, it is Impractical Cats, which means that every story here has something to do with cats, taking as its springboard the 2 cats that are a part of Locust Moon, the actual shop, Rooster, Cowboy, and Inky. And so we get a lot of those, especially Inky. Mm-hmm. And I want to come back to those particular cats as we discuss the entries in this issue of Quarter Moon. But if you're interested in finding out more about Quarter Moon, you can definitely go to the Locust Moon website, which is locustmoon.com, and you can see how each issue has its own theme. So, for instance, Quarter Moon number 2 was Locust Man versus Monster. So I guess monster themes. Issue number 4, it was themed water. And then issue number 5 was Revenge. So each of these issues of the quarterly has some kind of theme that all of the stories, all of the art, in one way or another, loosely or strongly, will hang to. And this one is cats.
Yep.
And, as with the Prometheus Eternal, there are a lot of recognizable names here. Mm-hmm. We have an entry from Farrell Dalrymple again. We also have occasional illustrations from people like Gregory Benton, Dean Hashbiel. So, I mean, there are a lot of recognizable names here, and a lot of people whose work I was not familiar with. In fact, most of them are new creators to me.
Yeah, me too. And there's some really nice stuff in here. And, actually, this is basically the same price as Prometheus Eternal, although it's more pages. but it's also in black and white. But again, anthologies, and we were talking about anthologies not too terribly long ago about the not the demise of them, but there are a lot of great ones out there. So it's good to see this, as well as Prometheus Eternal. But yeah, again, these are all black and white stories, and these are all related to, or there's some kind of cat element involved. And Derek, I'll go ahead and confess, and I'll probably get a lot of hate mail. I'm not really a big cat fan.
So this wasn't for you, huh?
Well, but I enjoyed it. I really did enjoy it. I mean, it didn't make me want to go out and adopt a cat because we already adopted a dog. But I thought, oh boy, cats. This is just not going to be for me. But I really did enjoy it. There, like Prometheus Eternal, there were a lot of favorites that I had in this, and I don't think there were any stories that I didn't like. I liked them all.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I'm much more of a dog person than a cat person, although we do have a cat in the house, and who's very nice. I mean, when he poops where he shouldn't, I don't like that. But, that's why I'm more of a dog person, right?
Right.
The dog knows when to be let out, and doesn't have an attitude most of the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, whether you're a cat person or not, I think everything in here is definitely worth reading. In fact, the collection starts off with a story from Farrell Dalrymple, "The Gathering of Quarter Moon," and so it's a 2-pager, so it's not very long. But you have cats that are gathering, climbing up a tree, and then going into a room where you have these, it looks like 3 young women creators. And so, they're musicians, writers. One is reading a book, and they're having a meeting, and the cats interrupt their gathering.
Yeah, and it's fun, and it's a good way to start the book. It just shows the combination of cats and magic and cats and art. And it's a good setup for everything that we're going to get after this. And again, Dalrymple is just wonderful.
Yeah. Now, was there a story in this collection that stood out for you?
Well, at first I got very, very excited about the first story after that, called The Blind World, because I saw S.M. Vidari's name. I guess I'm saying that right. And I had met him at Small Press Expo and picked up his book called Iron, which he wrote and illustrated, which actually is one of my favorite finds or discoveries for me of the year, even though that book came out a few years ago. And so when I saw his name, I got very excited, and I went through the whole story and thought, wow, that was great. And then I went back and I saw, oh, he didn't draw it. He wrote it. But the art by Jennifer Doyle is wonderful. So I really wasn't disappointed, because it's together it works so well. And this story, The Blind World, is about these 2 cats, and they are amongst what actually looks like Greek ruins, which is significant because they both have Greek names. Galinthius and Hecate are the names of the cats, and they're among these ruins, and they're Hecate tells Galinthius, you've got a lot to learn about, just basically the way that she's behaving. And there's a woman that comes into the story, and I won't tell too much about it, but the way that the cats interact with her. And it's just really fun story. It's a very atmospheric story. Again, this anthology, like Prometheus Eternal, goes through a lot of different moods, a lot of different styles, and to me, this is a really good way to start it after we have the Dalrymple story.
Yeah, because you're right. The Dalrymple story is a little more upbeat, light, in a good way. I mean, not in the light is in less serious, but it's not as dour. Blind World is a little more serious, but it's not the most depressing story in this collection, or the darkest.
No.
But one of the darkest stories in this collection is actually one of my favorites, and this is Summer of the Cat by Tia McClelland. And I was not familiar with the work of McClelland before. This is a story, it's called Summer of the Cat, And the narrator is a young woman. And I'll just read the opening lines from this as a setup. Every summer I would stay with my cousin. Her town had a myth that there was a coven of cat women witches. They stole girls and taught them their ways. It was bizarre. It was probably a tall tale from the witch hunting days. And then this narrator goes on to tell the story of that summer, her staying with her cousin. And they're both alike. They're both kind of loners, doing their own thing. So they hang out together one summer and then find a little abandoned kitten. So they start playing with the kitten. They go back, they feed it, and it gets a little fatter. In other words, they start to adopt it over that summer. And then one day, the narrator says to, I may have said her earlier, but it actually looks like a him. It looks like a young boy says to his cousin, I'm going to go home, basically go home early. And so his cousin's going to stick around at their playing place, which is by a tree, and then come home later. Well, I don't want to give away what happens in this story, but let's just say it's not very upbeat. And at first, the narrator thinks, with the young kid's mind, that maybe there's something about this witch coven myth, the cats and the witches. But it's something much more serious and real world, and it does take a really depressing turn. But it's a very well written story, well presented, narrated, and even though it does have a dark tone, I think it's one of my favorites of this collection.
It's one of my favorites too, and you're right that it does get very dark. And there's one little panel that I want to bring out that really doesn't have anything to do with the story, or it does, but I mean I'm not giving anything away. But there's a little scene where there's a sandwich laid down. It looks like a picnic.
Oh yeah.
You know what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And the narrator says after an hour, her mom and I got worried. And then it shows this same sandwich.
Meaning the cousin hadn't gotten home yet.
Right, meaning the cousin hasn't arrived yet. And then there's the sandwich, and there's one little ant crawling toward the sandwich, and it says, then the cops were called. They asked me where she was last. And then in the last panel, you see the sandwich, and it looks like it's in a state of decay almost. And you've got this whole line of ants. I was told to come to that place. That's a really, really sophisticated way to tell the reader what is going on and create an incredible amount of tension. I mean, and it's a really little panel. It's 3 real small panels, but it does such a great job of making you aware of how creepy the scene is that we're
Yeah,
in.
and I think creepy is a good way of describing the story.
Yeah, it is. And McClellan is certainly somebody that I want to see more of her work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, one that is much more upbeat is by Mike Segier, and I'm not sure how you pronounce the name. It is Sgier. Mm-hmm. So I guess it's Segier. And this is Silent Cats. And this one has some of the most pleasant art. Pleasant in terms of it makes me smile.
Yeah.
It just looks fun, and it does have a more upbeat tone to it, and there's some humor in it as well. And basically, this is a story of a small cat. It could be a kitten, for all we know, who sees this young woman as she approaches a wall, and she looks like she's wearing a cape, and she makes a line on the wall in the shape of a door, and then uses this as a secret entrance, I assume, into a lair of some sort. At first, I thought it was this young woman's lair, but it turns out that it's not. But the title is Silent Cat, and at first I thought, okay, well, the reference to the silent cat, actually silent cats, plural. And so the silent cat is this cat that witnesses the young woman breaking into this place. But what we learned later is that this young woman herself, the one with the cape, is a silent cat. And I won't explain what that means, but it's a nice ending to this story.
Yeah, it's a really nice story, and I like what he does with his panel layout. At first we got this panel with the cat kind of licking her paw on top of these 2 barrels. And then the cat stops and kind of takes a look and sees this, what looks like a superhero. And then we get a lot of really small panels, very focused, some really strange things going on. And then we get like this whole page spread that's like really wild. And even though it's black and white, it is really psychedelic looking when they're walking down that path. There's some really, really nice work here. And again, like you said, he's Skyer is, I guess that's how you say it, is someone I would really, really like to see some more work from.
Yeah, I guess Skyer does sound like it makes more sense. What did I say? Skier?
I don't know.
Yeah, but no, that however you pronounce it, it's definitely good work. And you're right in those. You mentioned those. There are 2 pages where you have a full page each of this almost psychedelic looking art. It becomes kind of frantic in a way, frantic, and I like that. And it immediately drew me back to a previous story in this collection by Robert Woods, The Uncanny Under-the-Sea Adventures of Fish Boy, Fish Boy versus Death. And they're very different stories. Mm-hmm. But the reason that Skyer's work reminded me of Woods' The Uncanny Under-the-Sea Adventures of Fish Boy is the art in The Uncanny Under-the-Sea Adventures of Fish Boy is this kind of frantically paced work throughout. I mean, everything about it is just action-packed, almost to the point of I felt a little claustrophobic reading this.
Yeah, you really do.
There's a lot packed into the pages and the panels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot. But it's a lot. It's a fun story.
Yeah. And now, we mentioned at the outset of Quarter Moon number 6 that they take as a springboard the 2 cats that populate the brick-and-mortar store of Locust Moon, and that is Rooster Cowboy and Inky. And Inky definitely gets a lot of love in this issue.
Yeah, there's a lot of Inky to be had here. There's Why We Love or Why We Heart Inky. Uh-huh. And then there's another one, isn't there, with Inky in the title?
The Ballad of the Inky Bastard.
That's right.
Yeah, and this is by Josh O'Neill, and Comey. That the aforementioned Jim Comey that we discussed with the Prometheus collection. So, and this is interesting as well. And in fact, it's right after the Ballad of the Inky Bastard story that we get a letter to the editor from, of all creatures, Rooster Cowboy. So basically, this is Rooster Cowboy, actually the first cat that they got, the female, saying that, I like the store, I like this collection, but I do have to say that I feel slighted. And there's too much attention to Inky, and I am no longer going to be your official pet, a member of this bookstore. She says, you may still pet me and give me all of your usual love and affection, but I cannot promise that my heart will be in it. Quarter Moon magazine has lost a committed reader, and Locust Moon has lost what is clearly and universally acknowledged as its best cat. Meow, Rooster Cowboy.
Yeah. And then there's a little bit, of course, Inky has the last word, because there's a little bit of a postscript from Inky, which we won't say.
I guess. Well, we could say it on this show, just not your and Gwen's. But
that's right.
But also a part of the last words of Inky are 2 of the final little pinup bits. These are by. One is by Dean Haspiel, the other is Krista Cassano, and these are placed throughout this issue of Quarter Moon. Some of them are illustrated by, or one is illustrated by Gregory Benton, another by David Mack. There are a couple, I think a couple from David Mack, one by Bill Sienkiewicz, J.G. Jones. And so, again, they have some fairly recognizable names here that, even if they're not writing the stories in this collection, are providing pinup art of cats in one form or another.
Yeah, and this is a good anthology for. Anybody that's ever been a cat owner is going to find something in here, and to recognize. Sometimes it's just pretty much recognizing typical cat behavior in some of these stories, and then others, as we pointed out, are wildly different, like the Uncanny Under the Sea Adventures of the Fish Boy, things like that. So there's, like Prometheus, there's a little bit of everything. There's a lot of stories that you can have some fun with. There's some stories that have more of a grittier side. There's a little bit of everything.
Yeah, and if you don't count the Paul Pope illustration of a cat, which is on the back cover, The last entry in the book is by someone we've had on the show before, Jeremy Baum. And the reason why I really like this one is you have what I consider kind of a typical character of Jeremy Baum, which is this brunette woman with kind of a long face, and she's holding on to a cat, and she's licking the cat.
Yeah, that's a great way to end.
And I love Jeremy's art. Everything in this issue of Quarter Moon is definitely worth checking out.
Yep.
So, Andy, you want to move on to the third Locust Moon Press book that we're discussing today?
Let's do it.
And this is different from the others in that of the 4 texts that we're discussing, this is the one that is not a collection from a variety of different creators.
That's true. It is a standalone, and it looks like it's 5 or 6 issues worth of the comic book. Is that right?
5.
5, yeah. And the collection or the graphic novel is called Shaman, and it's by Ben Kahn and Bruno Hidalgo.
Right.
So this is the only really non-anthology book that we're looking at today from Locust Moon, and it is actually I'll just tell you how it starts. It starts with a guy in a hoodie and a mask, and he sees this teenage girl, and he demands to know who is the shaman. And the girl says, "This is a world of noble heroes and savage villains, a world where men and women of great power die every day. And the shaman is the one who brings them back." And the guy says, "You practiced that little speech at home?" And she says, "I did. Do you like it?" And that's the type of tone that we get throughout Shaman. I mean, it's snarky. It's funny. It's kind of urban. It's supernatural. It's absurd. I don't know about you, Derek, but I had a really, really good time with Shaman.
I did too. And when I first got this book, and this is another one of those that I was not aware of before we got copies of this for our Publisher Spotlight, I didn't know what to expect, and I looked at the cover. And in fact, the cover is by, again, Farrell Dalrymple. Mm-hmm. We get a lot of Dalrymple in this episode. Actually, maybe more Dalrymple than we got about a year and a half ago when we interviewed him on the show. You can't have too much Dalrymple. I mean, it's great stuff. Right. But I looked at this and I thought, okay, well, this looks like a hero tale. And it's not like I was suspicious of it, but I thought, am I going to enjoy this? And I do, because it is so much fun. And so what Khan and Hidalgo are doing is just having a great time with the superhero slash mystery slash horror genres. And because Shaman is the kind of a hero that you will see in comics, and we've seen over and over again throughout the history of comics, but their comedic take on these genres just really makes this a fun read. Now, I mentioned I was not aware of Shaman before we got our copies. Had you heard of Shaman?
No, I had not.
Because apparently these were individual issues, and this was also a Kickstarter campaign. Mm-hmm. And I knew of neither.
I didn't either. And, I don't know if this is something that my shop got, because they do get a lot of small press comics. But, it was news to me.
Yeah. So, in fact, in your setup of this book, which collects the 5 issues of Shaman, and by the way, I hope that there are more that are going to be produced, we basically have the main 3 characters in this book. There's the character himself, Shaman, which we can talk a bit about. But then there is the apprentice, the young woman, the teenager, LL. That's her name, right? LL?
Yeah. I kept trying to see if there was another name, but that's the only one I ever saw.
Yeah. And then the young man that she speaks with at the beginning is the Vanish, or at least he is the character, the Vanish. What is his real name? I'm blanking.
The Vanisher. Oh, his real name is wait.
Wu.
His name is Wu. Now, the grandfather, I think, is named Ron Wu.
Ron Wu, yes, who was the original Vanisher.
Yeah. And the whole, and listeners should know that part of the fun of this is of course, the shaman resurrects certain people, and there's always somebody that's around saying, "Why are you resurrecting this guy? You don't need to be resurrecting him." And sometimes that person is LL, who's telling shaman, who is LL is actually shaman's daughter, is telling him, "Why are you resurrecting this person? You shouldn't do this. This was an evil person." And you have all these great back and forth, snarky comments going back and forth, because shaman is always having to defend whoever he's resurrecting.
Yeah. Now we find out that Elle is not his real daughter, but I guess we could say adopted, or could be real, because when you read this book, you'll see what we're trying to refer to without actually saying it. But he does, in one sense, bring her into the world, and we find this out. I think it's in that final chapter, or what was originally issue number 5 of Shaman. So, yeah, you're right. The thing about the character Shaman is that, as he tells us a couple of times, he can't really control who he brings into the world, or brings back from the dead. It's something that he senses from, let's say, natural forces. And it's kind of sketchy, but it's supposed to be that way. And so if he gets the sense that someone has to be brought back, he'll bring him back, whether this was someone heroic and helpful or someone who is destructive. And in fact, in one of these chapters, the person that he's about to bring back is actually a villain, someone who killed a lot of people.
Yeah.
And so when certain people, these space guardians, find out that he's about to bring back from the dead this evil villain that killed a lot of people that these guardians had actually put down originally, they come back and they try to fight with Shaman to get him to relent, but he won't, because he has to bring this villain back.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, he gets Zach is the kid's name.
Okay.
Yeah. In fact, he gets into an argument with Zach about bringing this person back, and Zach says, "You're making a mistake. This is wrong." And the shaman says, "I'm giving the gift of life. How is that wrong?" And Zach says, "She's a murderer. She's evil." Well, there's that word again. You're still thinking like a superhero in black and white. This is all gray. Get in line or get out. So you got a lot of, it's fun and it's snarky, but there's also this kind of philosophical thing going on. And, all of these things make this work. And I don't really understand how. There were times when I was reading it and I was kind of scratching my head thinking, this just should not work, because there's so many elements going on, but you never feel like it's out of control.
Yeah, exactly. And as the book continues, it gets weirder. So, for instance, in the 4th section, or the 4th chapter, Shaman brings back Babe Ruth.
Yeah, I love that section. That is great.
And it's a great story. And he is battling the green monster.
The big green monster,
which is, I guess, is that what they call the outfield wall, the green wall?
Yeah, that's what they call it at Fenway Park.
Fenway, yeah. So, but actually, the green monster, the wall actually becomes a monster, and so that's why the shaman brings back Babe Ruth in order to take down that green wall, the green monster, because the Red Sox and the Yankees, bitter rivalry. So there's that. But even funnier is the fact that we see Babe Ruth. He continues to be a part of the shaman world in this final chapter, which takes place on July 4th. It's a cookout. So shaman is having a party, and he invites some of his friends. And, some of these friends, most of them, seem to be from the real world, right? They're normal people. They're not mysterious heroes of any sort, occult or otherwise. But Babe Ruth is there, and he summons golems to help serve the food. And so here, and in fact, the cover of issue number 4, or what opens chapter 4 in the book, or 5, is illustrated by Jim Rugg. And you have Shaman grilling burgers and hot dogs, where behind him there is a hero, a couple of neighborhood people, a golem, and then the aforementioned Ron Wu, the original Vanisher. And we should mention that the cover of the original issues were illustrated by different people. So, for instance, cover 3, wonderfully illustrated by J.G. Jones. Jim Cumley, we mentioned a couple times already, did cover 4, and then Jim Rugg did the issue 5 cover I just referenced. So, we got some great art here, and we've got fun stories. This is something that I hope continues.
I do too, and that I can't stop talking about the Babe Ruth story because it's so fun, and it's like, the dialogue in it. If it were to be filmed, it would just be really fast and really the delivery would be great. There's one great scene, or there's several, but once Babe Ruth is resurrected and he's talking to LL, and so Ruth says, "So how long I've been out for anyhow?" And LL says, "We have a black president." And Ruth says, "Right, so I've been dead a while." It's just funny. And then later on, the jokes, you kind of have to remember where the jokes came from and what has happened before, because he's walking down the street with Shaman and LL's there, and Babe Ruth says, or he gets asked by LL, "Hey, is this how you died, fighting the big green monster?" And he says, "Nah, what got me was just a lifetime of enjoying life. Too much food, too much booze, too many women, the little things." And then Shaman says, "Well, that's what they say, the little things that kill." And then LL says, "Who says that?" And Shaman says, "Bush." And LL says, "The president?" And he says, "Forget it." And then Ruth says, "You elected a black guy named Bush?" I mean, there's all this great stuff that, you kind of have to remember what's happened as far as the comedy goes, but it just builds and builds. I mean, these guys could write stand-up. I mean, this is so funny, but, you get caught off guard because as soon as the humor has hit a high point, then you've got something else going on, something weird or some horror. And it kind of reminds me of Hellboy, or maybe even The Goon. Maybe the art is less polished, and I don't mean to say less polished in a negative way, but it's just kind of a wheels off type of comic book that you just can't help but like.
Exactly. And, part of the humor, we've mentioned LL, the apprentice, a few times, the, I guess, so to speak, daughter of Shaman. We haven't mentioned anything about her powers. Now, she is an apprentice, and what she does, what I guess defines her as this kind of magical shamanesque character, is her tattoos. And she gets tattooed, and the tattoos then become sources for the spells that she's able to cast. So, for instance, in the 3rd chapter, I think it is, she has a tattoo of Isaac Newton, of all things,
right,
on her back, and it's these little tattoo fairies that are actually putting them on her in the parlor that she's at. Now, you may wonder, okay, well, what kind of tattoo is Isaac Newton, and how magical could that be? Well, later on, what she does is she summons this big spirit of Isaac Newton, and Isaac Newton drops apples.
Right.
And in fact, at one point, Zach, the former Vanisher, asks, "Well, what spells do you have?" And LL responds, "Magic Isaac Newton Ghost." Zach says, "What'll it do?" Then she says, "Gravity magic, bitches." And we see this image of a ghostly, big, towering figure of Isaac Newton walking across the cityscape, dropping apples.
That's great.
Yeah. And then in the Babe Ruth story, she has she gets a tattoo that has a biohazard symbol. And when we start the story, she's not feeling very well. She has a cold or something. And we learn that, or she learns that it's this biohazard tattoo that's poisoning her, and that's why she feels bad. So one of the ways that they fight this green monster is for the monster to ingest her because she is toxic.
Yeah.
Because of the tattoo that is of a biohazard.
Yeah, there's just so much clever stuff going on here, and what amazes me about it is the diversity of the stories. I mean, the last story in this collection is basically just a 4th of July party. And, who would think, what could happen at a 4th of July party? It's pretty typical, but it's not typical. But it's funny, too. It's just a really, really fun collection. And like you, I hope there's going to be a lot more of Shaman to come in our future.
Exactly. And it's in this last chapter, the 4th of July party, that we get more backstory of the shaman than we get any other place in the book. And one of the great things about this story and its backstory is that it sets the stage, for me at least, for potential future shaman stories.
I sure hope so.
Yeah. Definitely something to check out.
Yes.
Okay, so Andy, we're coming into the home stretch, and we're looking at Little Nemo's Big New Dreams. And this is published by Locust Moon Press in conjunction with Francoise Mouly's Toon Graphics.
That's right. And being a librarian, I'm pretty familiar with Toon books because we get so many of them in the library. And for listeners who may not know, Toon Books publishes graphic novels for very, very young readers all the way up to, I guess I would say maybe not quite middle grade readers, but maybe up to that level. But the Toon books are just superbly put together. The art is just extraordinary. The stories are great. They're great teaching tools. Kids love them. I can't say enough great things about Toon books.
Yeah, and in many ways it does make sense that this book is that they made this book, and maybe a little backstory here would be necessary. Now, for those who do not know, and this has gotten a lot of press over the past year, that Locust Moon Press back in 2014 had a Kickstarter campaign called Little Nemo Dream Another Dream. And basically what they wanted to do was to honor Winsor McCay, the creator of Little Nemo and Slumberland. And they invited a variety of different artists, from different backgrounds, different styles, different parts of the comics industry, to submit their own homage, I guess, to Winsor McCay and Little Nemo. And they wanted it to be in, this longer sized newspaper, broadsheet sized book. And this grew to something quite phenomenal. And I didn't find out about this Kickstarter campaign until right after it ended. And I've been kicking myself ever since. I wish I had been in on the ground floor, because they have these broadsheet newspaper-sized works of art from a variety of people like Michael Allred, Paul Pope, Yuko Samuzzi, J.H. Williams, David Mack, Craig Thompson, Carla Speed McNeil, Bill Sienkiewicz, Peter Bagg, Cliff Chang, on and on and on and on and on. So there's a lot of different contributors here, and this book is now available. So, for instance, you can go to Amazon.com, and if you do go to Amazon, please be sure to do so through our associate links on the website, because we get a little kickback if you purchase the book, especially something like this, because its normal price is $124.99, or around that, okay? Now, Andy, this looks phenomenal. I have to tell you, though, I don't have the disposable income to dish out that much for something even this fabulous.
I don't either, but I kind of have mixed emotions about it, because the only Little Nemo book that I own is the first Sundays, Fabulous Sundays, or
Sunday Press.
Yeah, and that set me back quite a bit, and it's an incredible book. I haven't bought the second book, and I would love to get this book, the one that you're talking about, but there's just I just don't have the money. But I'm so glad that this version exists, which is certainly affordable.
Right. So basically, and the reason why we're saying this is, I mentioned earlier, this is kind of a big phenomena. It's a very successful Kickstarter campaign, and now, you can get it yourself with after the Kickstarter. It won 2 Eisner Awards this year as Best Anthology and Best Publication Design, which is by Jim Rugg. So again, this is an important book. It has over 100 cartoonists paying tribute to McCay. But again, it is quite expensive, and it's also quite big. At 16 by 24 inches and weighing at about 10 pounds, where the hell are you going to put something like this? I mean, I have books that are that big. I still have problems finding space for it. But now, if you didn't want to get this one, or if you're not able to get the Little Nemo Dream Another Dream, you definitely can afford its, I guess, baby version, if we call it that, and that is this new Toon Graphics book. Because what Josh O'Neill and the others have done is to take about 30-some of those stories from Dream Another Dream and to put it into smaller form through the Toon Graphics book.
Yeah, and again, because of the size of those books, the books that were published before this, and the Dream a Dream, it's almost impossible for young readers to, number one, be able to get those books because they're so expensive, and number two, to get their hands around it because they're so flaming big. So I'm really, really glad that this came out. And Derek, that before the show I asked you how, the size of this book, Little Nemo's Big New Dreams, because most of the Toon books that I've seen in the library are rather small. But you said this is pretty much a standard size, comic book size or graphic novel size? Yeah,
standard graphic novel size book, hardbound. And by the way, I wanted to ask you, flamin'? Okay, that's fine. I'll go with that. But yeah, this is a more standard book size. So now you mentioned, or we have been mentioning, that Little Nemo Dream Another Dream is in broadsheet newspaper size, so it's really long. Mm-hmm. The majority of the comics in the Toon Graphics edition that you and I are discussing are laid out to such you have to turn the book sideways in order to read them. Yeah. They don't rearrange the panels. One, it would be sacrilege to do so to fit a different book presentation format. But also, you really couldn't with these because almost all the creators in this book pay tribute to Winsor McCay by using his same kind of style. So the way that the panels are arranged, the way that you read them, and sometimes you read them in a little erratic, non-traditional ways of reading comics, you can't break up that information. You can't break up the reading process. Right. And so basically what the editors have done is to take the pieces that they've pulled from Dream Another Dream and basically set it in the book where you have to turn it to read the vast majority of them. And for the most part, that's not a problem. Now, I say for the most part because what you tend to lose in going from this broadsheet-sized big book to a more traditional book that you have to turn it to read it in a certain way is that almost almost all of the tributes here, the very middle of the comic itself is the middle of the book. And so you have that transition from one page to the other. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the art, I don't want to say suffers, but you have to pull the book back to see all of it. And so you can't really get the same kind of complete view of the art in this book as you could in Dream Another Dream. But again, that's one of the downsides of going from one kind of format of presentation to another.
And Derek, we should probably point out, we're assuming that everyone listening to this podcast knows who Winsor McCay was and how his artwork appeared. Of course, Winsor McCay, as probably most listeners will know, was enormously famous at the time that he was drawing and writing these cartoons and this artwork that appeared in newspapers. And at the time, those newspapers, the pages were the actual size that some of these large books that we're talking about were. This isn't standard, type of comics that we would get in the newspapers today. These were very, very large, which is why they were published in such large editions. And to shrink them down would really diminish the power of the art and the detail. You really do have to see them in their original size to be able to appreciate that. And it sounds like they really have made every effort to come as close to that as possible here with this Toon Graphics. But Derek, it's it seems like you're saying that even though they tried to be as faithful to the original as far as size and everything, that there's still something to be desired.
Well, I mean, basically, it's the fold of the book. Okay,
Right.
so basically, you're going from one format of presentation, the broadsheet edition of Little Nemo Dream Another Dream, the one that's over $120. By the way, for the holiday season, I don't know how long they're going to do this, but if you go to locustmoon.com, I think you can get it for $100.
Oh, that's a deal.
It's a deal. But anyway, back to our discussion. So it's going from this Dream Another Dream format where you have the size of each contribution is newspaper size as the original, that broadsheet 16 by 21. So, that's fine. You get the visuals there all in front of you. But in the book, in this Toon Graphics book, in order to do that, then you have to present what would have been the broadsheet sized format a little smaller. And the smallness though is not an issue. It's that you have to turn the book in order to get that same broadsheet effect. And by doing so, with some, not all, of these contributions, the spine of the book or the break between pages kind of breaks the art. Sometimes to the point that you can't see everything unless you kind of pull the book back. And I don't want to do so dramatically because I don't want to break a spine.
Right. And too, Derek is actually looking at an actual print version. I'm looking at a PDF that does not have those issues.
So you may not know exactly what I'm talking about. Now, I don't think that's a big deal, but it's one small drawback to this kind of format, but it definitely does not take away from the art in this book, because now you do have 2 or 3 examples of Winsor McCay's actual Little Nemo in Slumberland, but the vast majority of this book is by other creators who use Little Nemo, the original, as an inspiration. And some of them, it's kind of like what we were talking about with Prometheus Eternal. Some are rather faithful to the original, and some go off on more of a tangent.
Yeah, there are some that are pretty much very, like you said, very, very faithful to what McCay did in his strips, and others kind of take it as a jumping off point. But there's so much here, just like we talked about in all of these anthologies. There's so much here that is diverse enough to keep things interesting. And even if they all imitated McCay, 100%, which you can't do, it would still be interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and all of them take as its subject matter Little Nemo himself in one form or another. Some adopt McCay's style of paneling more so than others in terms of its experimentation. Where you have unusual arrangements, unusual to the point that many of these contributions have numbered panels, as the original Little Nemo in Slumberland did, where Winsor McCay numbered the panels so that the reader would know where to go next. Because even if you're used to reading comics, with many of the original Little Nemo strips, the way that the panels were laid out, it was a tad unusual, so McCay would indicate, where to go, panel 1, 2, 3, so on and so forth. And so you have some of the contributors in this book doing the same.
Yeah, there's a real nice contribution from Paulo Rivera that does that's numbered that way. And there's another one that's really complicated, and I think that was James Harvey. Where the numbers, where the comic actually starts in the middle of the page. You see the number 1 in the middle of the page, and you see 2, 3, 4, 5, and then it jumps up and goes counterclockwise. It's almost like a maze. So yeah, the numbering is essential in some of these.
Yeah, I'm trying to find the Harvey one because I think that's one of the ones. Let me see, what page is that on?
Harvey's on 31.
Yes. Okay. I agree. I think that of all the contributions in this book, and again, I haven't seen the larger Dream Another Dream, where these are pulled from, but of the ones in this book, this has to be, in terms of its panel arrangement, the most complex and I would even say ambitious in what it attempts to do, because it is so unconventional. But And so in that way, it very much takes in the spirit of Winsor McCay's Little Nemo in terms of not only the panel arrangement, but also the levity that you'll find. For instance, right before this panel number 1 that, as you mentioned, is on the middle of the broadsheet, you have a clown pointing to the first panel, and above him is a little balloon that says "Start here." And then on the opposite side of the page, you have a companion clown who is laughing as he's witnessing what's happening with Nemo in this story. And, it's that kind of childlike, dreamlike, or if we're talking about clowns here, maybe nightmare-like tone that it really does bring out the best of Winsor McCay. It's like Winsor McCay is being channeled through all these different artists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And anybody unfamiliar with the Little Nemo comics should know that, Little Nemo has all these great adventures, and always in the last panel, he's either in bed or he's fallen out of bed, or one of his parents is saying, "We told you not to eat, all that, blueberry pie," or whatever it was. And they stay faithful to that. But one of the ones that I really, really like is Cliff Chang does it, but it's not with Little Nemo dreaming, it's with Winsor McCay dreaming.
Oh, yeah.
Which is really clever.
A real standout.
Yeah, that's a really great one.
Yeah, it is. This is the second time this year, Andy, you and I have discussed adaptations of Little Nemo.
That's right.
Because over the summer, we did the IDW.
Yeah, and that was a fun collection, too.
It was, and I think that was also an Eisner Award winner. In fact, this year was a big Little Nemo year.
Yeah.
But, there are a lot of different kind of comics here. And I think it's a little easier with both Quarter Moon and Prometheus Eternal for us to talk about some of our favorites. I'm hard-pressed to tell you which ones stand out for me in this book because they're all so good. Although I will tell you that one thing that really appeals to me are the contributions in this collection that play around with in almost like a Grant Morrison way. And by the way, Grant Morrison is not a part of this collection, as he was with the Prometheus Eternals.
That's true.
Yeah. But it's this Morrisonian way of metafictionally playing around with the medium itself. And one such comic is by, again, we've mentioned him several times on the show already, David Mack. And actually, this comes right after the James Harvey Nemo contribution. This is Little Kabuki in Dreamland. So, of course, it's playing off of Mack's Kabuki comic. And it's very relatively simple art, I think, for Mack, but it's straightforward. And I'll go over it real quick. Basically, you have Little Kabuki, which is the Little Nemo stand-in here in this one. And she says, "Mama, where are you?" She's just waking up. She's in bed. And her mother is standing above her, and she says, "I'm here." And the way that she's presented is that the mother's body takes up the right side of that panel, her head and her hair the top, and her hair strings down on the left side of that panel, and then the robe that the mother has on kind of cups the bottom of the panel. So basically the mother is, as a panel, encapsulating Little Kabuki. So the mother says, "I'm here." Little Kabuki says, "You are all around." Literally, "You are the shape of borders." The mother says, "We draw our own borders." And as she's saying this, she starts to disappear. Her hair and her clothing start to disappear from framing the panel. And then in the penultimate panel, we're left with a broken line, but the mother is saying the borders, the edges, don't really exist. And then the final panel, which is borderless, the mother's words, "When you realize this, you wake up."
Yeah.
And I think that is one of the most moving contributions in this collection, at least for me. And I loved the message. I loved where it was going, playing around with the form. And a similar story comes in one of the last contributions, and this is multi-paged. This is J.G. Jones's Little Nemo in Slumberland. And some of these bits are titled Little Nemo in Slumberland, but others, like the David Mack, are given different titles. So the J.G. Jones comic begins with a one-page panel, and Nemo is looking at the moon, and of course the moon has a face, but Nemo's looking at the moon through a telescope, and Flip walks up and says, what are you looking at, or something to that effect. And Nemo says, wow, I'm looking up at the moon here. And in essence, he says, the world is so large, you feel kind of insignificant as, being a part of it. There's so much out there, and here we are, these little specks. And then so what Flip does is he says, what you have to do is adjust your perspective. Mm-hmm. And so we start off with a full page panel. When we turn the page to 64, we see what starts off as one panel that almost takes up 2/3 of that page. But then what Flip starts to do is, so it's still a large panel, but then Flip takes a pen or a pencil and he starts to make borders within this larger panel. And so what he ends up doing is making smaller panels. So Flip as a character is drawing the panels that he and Nemo are actually inside of. And because these are smaller panels, the world is more contained, it's more manageable, and so they don't feel as insignificant. But then Nemo says, but that doesn't leave too many things, does it? And Flip says, I see what you mean. And then what Flip starts to do is he starts to move things around and to break borders and gutter space between panels. And I just love the way that Jones plays around with the conventions of the medium there in ways that, again, very Morrison-esque.
And I love how Flip hangs onto the moon. He grabs onto the moon. It's like he's pulling the moon down to get it inside the panel. And the way it ends is just wonderful.
Yeah. And then the very last contribution is somewhat of a take on the same thing. It's by Jim Rugg. You don't even have a full page of a Nemo comic. What you do is you have a Nemo comic that is askew toward the top of the page, and as many of these, and Nemo falls down in the very last small panel is him falling out of the bed, right? Yeah. But this last one, Nemo has fallen not out of the bed, but out of the comic itself.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a fun way to end it.
Yeah, it is. And there's so many great contributions here. I love what each person brings to their take on Nemo. I mean, we could probably devote an entire episode just slowly going through each and every one of these 30-some contributions.
And, Derek, a lot of these, of course, many of these artists are very familiar to all of us, and some of them do, they all do wonderful work. But there are some artists that I really want to explore further that I had not heard of, such as Nick Poloko and Bishaka Kumar Som. I was not familiar with either of those artists, but I really loved the work that I saw from them here. And those are just two that just really struck me that I've not heard of these before. I want to find out more.
Yeah, in fact, the one on page 43, Nick Poloko.
Yeah, that's the first one.
Yeah, is really good. It's wonderful art. But the story itself, Nemo in his dream in this one, he's inside a bottle of a ship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fun.
Yeah, and it's really clever. And what other one did you say that you were introduced to that you didn't know the creator?
It was Bishak Kumar Som.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Where you have a female protagonist who is an architect.
Yeah.
And so the arrangement of so you don't have a Little Nemo proper, but you have this female protagonist, an architect student, who apparently just completed her thesis, and she, in her dream, is stuck in one of these architectural designs that was a part of her thesis, and she's wondering, oh my God, am I having to do this thesis over again?
Right, yeah. And I think I looked her up, and I think the only thing that she's done is a book on architecture. I'm not sure that she's done anything else. But I certainly would like to see more.
Actually, according to the bio in the back, it's a he.
Oh, it's a he. Oh, yeah. My apologies.
Well, no, it's okay. It's easy to see that because it's a female protagonist.
It's a female protagonist, yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned that because the little biographies in the back are really good. They're very concise, but they do tell us a lot, and I just should have read that when I was looking.
Yeah. Now, a creator who is definitely female, and actually the content of her contribution is very female-oriented as well, is Andrea Tsurumi. Mm-hmm. And this is Little Nemo in Slum Bra Land.
Yeah.
And so you have a young female Nemo, I guess, who is in this slum bra land with these creatures who are also female, and they're in a a shop, a boutique, part of a department store that is having a sale on bras. So that's what
kind
this
of
one is
caught me off
arranged around.
guard, but yeah, it really works. It works, and it's definitely a different direction for Nemo, which is good.
It is.
Yeah.
And I love the way this ends because you have these two fantastical creatures that take this young female Nemo into the bra shop. One says to the other, ugh, because they're trying to choose which bra to get. I can't, I give up. Can't I just let him flop around?
Yeah.
And then her companion says, let's see if Nemo found anything. In the last image
In the last
get
panel, yeah.
is this young Nemo looking down her shirt to see if anything's there.
Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah.
That's really good.
So, and again, some of these are going to be more faithful to the original, but others, like Tsurumi, play around with Nemo in very inventive ways.
Yeah, and some of them are a little bit odd and maybe even disturbing. The Hans Reichert is a little bit disturbing, and I think the strangest one is the Box Brown rendition. Of course, Box is a great guy, and he does some great stuff. But a lot of times he does, for me, some head scratchers. But I always enjoy it. But his was it was a little different.
Okay, I'm glad that you mentioned the Box Brown and the Hans Reichert. Because, you and I really like the work of Reichert. We talked about him several months ago in a webcomic show.
On the webcomics,
You're still doing that one with me. And by the way, miss you. I love working with Sean, but, you're on to other things. But, yeah, these are a little more, I don't want to say adult, but I don't think they're going to be as accessible to younger readers as most of the others. And then along with that, there's the one that's following Reichert, and that is the contribution from Mark Hempel. And this is one where Nemo is waking up, and as he's waking up, his father, and he's waking up in 2015, his father's saying, Nemo, you've been asleep for over 100 years. It's time to get up and start doing something with your life. Mm-hmm. And then what he means by that is literally you need to do something with your life. You need to get a job and get into the humdrum workaday world. And yes, you got to get a mortgage. You got to have kids. That's going to ruin your life. You're going to get in an unhappy marriage. And so the father off panel throughout is going over all of these things that a little kid Nemo is going to have to do as an adult. And in the second half of this strip, Little Nemo's head starts getting bigger and bigger, and then Flip walks on, and Nemo says, Flip, I'm so glad you're here. My head is engorged with Papa's bitterness and despair. Flip says, so I see. Rampant cranial expansion of the distorted world view variety. Nemo says, and it's getting so heavy that it's hard to hold up. Oh. And then Flip says, I have just the remedy, my boy. It's somewhat based on a party activity that's popular down in old Mexico. It's also somewhat painful. And then Flip whacks him in the head, and out of his head comes out words, conformity, self-doubt, useless crap, fear, guilt, regret, and then the part of the word bullshit, but you don't see the entire thing.
Right,
and when I saw that, I thought, that last panel, and then not only the Hempel contribution, but others as well, the Box Brown and the Reichert, they do seem a little more mature for young readers. And so on the one hand, I do see this as being part of the Toon Graphics series. On the other hand, yeah, there's some more mature stuff. I mean, not bare breasts. I mean, we have the bras, but I don't think there's anything here that's a problem with any readers. It just struck me that for a Toon book, this was a little more mature than you would normally find.
I thought so too. And another one that I really liked was the Jamie Tanner story, but it's really sinister. It's not really disturbing. I guess you could call it disturbing with the skull and the bird skull, and it kind of reminds me of Eyes Wide Shut, kind of this secret society type of thing. But it's a little bit, I could see a kid maybe having a little nightmare over that one.
Yeah. There's something definitely a little Nazi-esque about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then there's one that is definitely fun for young readers, and this is the one by Maris Wicks and Joan Quinones, Little Nemo in Slumberland. And basically Nemo is swallowed by a brontosaurus. And a brontosaurus is not a meat eater, because as Nemo's sliding into its mouth, he says, "I thought you were a vegetarian." And we see Nemo going down the dinosaur's digestive tract in his stomach as he's being digested and pooping out. And the reason I'm mentioning this is not only would this be fun for a young reader because of the digestion and pooping and all, but the fact that Maris Wicks does the story, it reminds me of her recent book with First Second about the human body.
Yeah.
That Gwen and I talked in our First Second spotlight.
Yeah, there's so much going on here, and even though there are a few that maybe I might have some quibbles about showing to a young reader, I would still give this book to a young reader. I mean, there's so much in it. There's so many, and there are probably artists like David Peterson that a lot of kids may be reading his other work.
Mouse Guard stuff.
His Mouse Guard stuff, and this, what he's done here is wonderful as well.
Right.
So, I think there's so many great things here that you wouldn't not want to give this to a kid.
Exactly. Now, let me ask you one that you may feel a little uncomfortable giving to a kid. Would it be the one by R. Sikoryak, the Freud one?
I don't know that I would be uncomfortable with that. The kid just might not get it.
Yeah, I mean, that's not one that's racy by any means, even though we're talking about Freud here and his dream world. In fact, this one is titled The Interpretation of Wonderful Dreams. Dr. Freud Presents His Insights. And this has to be one of my favorites. And I said earlier that it's hard for me to say, there's one that really stands out to me. But I love the work of Bob Sikoryak in the way that he adapts classic works of literature, pairing them with classic comics and comic styles. And, actually, this is not the first time that Sikoryak has used Winsor McCay's Little Nemo in an adaptation. There was one that he did, it appeared back in his Masterpiece Comics book that came out several years ago from Drawn and Quarterly, where he adapts Oscar Wilde's Picture of Dorian Gray by using Little Nemo in a very clever way. But here he's using Little Nemo again, but with a completely different text. So the one that he's adapting is the famous work from 1900 from Sigmund Freud, which really put him on the map, so to speak, and that is Interpretation of Dreams. And so you have in this one Freud talking with Nemo, and in the first panel, of course, Nemo has to be on the couch. And this is Freud's famous analytic couch. Right. That Nemo's lying on. And Nemo says a few things throughout. He basically responds to whatever is in the panel, but Freud does the vast, vast majority of the talking. And basically what you have here is Sikoryak having Freud describe what's in the book, Interpretation of Dreams, some of the main points. And underscoring that is underneath each panel in this strip is kind of a summary of different parts of the book as well. So, for instance, underneath the first panel, number 1, many personal associations surround the elements of every dream. And then in the second panel, there is the heading at the bottom, 2, little children's dreams express very straightforward desires. And then in the panel above, what Nemo sees is a bowl of these gigantic strawberries. And so you have different texts in Sikoryak's comic that are not really competing, but they're going in slightly different directions, but the ultimate destination is still an adaptation of some sort of Freud's Interpretation of Dreams. And using Little Nemo to do this. And I just think that this is wonderful. It's insightful in the way that Bob Sikoryak's adaptations always are. But one reason why I'm wondering if this may not be the most accessible comic to kids is not so much the subject matter, but also there's tons of text.
Yeah. And there aren't that many that are like that are really, really text heavy and aren't maybe as visually interesting to a kid as some of the others would be. But that one, I just see that as you give it to a kid, they might just gloss over it, or they might ask their parents, what's going on here? But I don't know, I would like to know, part of what I would like to know is the process, the selection process that went into choosing these. I mean, we've got 31 pages from the original, which had, I think, 100 pages. And, I don't know exactly what decisions were made as how much do we want this to be a kid-friendly book, because this is Toon Graphics, and how much do we just want to pick what we feel are the best, or are these the best that we think, would appeal to a younger audience? I'd like to know the decisions that were made there.
And, it didn't occur to me until after I talked with Josh that was a question I should have asked him in our brief interview. He did talk about pulling, these 31 contributions from Dream Another Dream, but I did not follow up and ask him, how did you choose the ones that you actually did choose, and then go into a little more detail about the decision-making process. I wish I had.
Yeah, I think it's great, and I think this is a great book, and this is a book, number one, that I wish we had included on our Young Readers edition, Gwen and I had covered, because I think we would have had a really good time discussing this, and we've had a good time discussing it. Mm-hmm. But, the other thing about this is, if you want to get into the world of Little Nemo, I mean, this book is a steal. I mean, it's not expensive at all, and you don't have to be a young reader to be able to appreciate this. I would snatch this up as soon as possible.
Yeah. And, we don't have time to talk about every single contribution in this book, but, some of the creators that are represented in this edition, you'll find Lodger Langridge, Cliff Chang, Carla Speed McNeil, Craig Thompson, mm-hmm. Xander Cannon, Cole Klosser, and we talked with him on the show.
That's right.
And I already mentioned Jim Rugg. So, I mean, there are a lot of people here. So many of these, Mark Buckingham, Gerhard does the back cover from mm-hmm. Cerebus fame. So a lot of people.
And, Derek, I not at all to slight what these artists do in their regular work, but I mean, these are wonderful artists. But did you sense that almost all of these artists seem to kind of rise above themselves for this project? It just seemed like they really, really upped their game for this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, think about it. They had as a standard, the great Winsor McCay.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the legendary comics in the United States, or in the world. So, yeah, they have to measure up. And I think that everyone in this collection came up looking very, very good.
Yeah, it's really a tremendous collection. And, if you can't afford the 100-page one, this is a great way to experience McKay.
Right. So, Andy, we talked about a lot on this Publisher Spotlight on Locust Moon Press. We started off with the comic book Prometheus Eternal. Then we moved on to the 6th volume of the Quarter Moon anthology. After that, we looked at Ben Kahn and Bruno Hidalgo's Shaman. Funny. And then we wrapped up with the great Toon Graphics collection, along with Locust Press, Little Nemo's Big New Dreams.
Yeah, there's a lot of great stuff here, and if you're not familiar with Locust Moon, you should be, so be on the lookout.
That's right. And I want to thank Josh O'Neill again for taking the time and talking with us on the Publisher Spotlight. And if you're listening to this and you haven't yet backed the lost work of Will Eisner, then you definitely have to head over to Kickstarter, check it out, and become a backer of this. I am. That's one that, and I know that Andy Kunka is backing it as well. So I'm really excited about this, and this is something that I'd maybe like to talk about next year.
Yeah.
And if you want to find great books like the ones that we're discussing on this episode, then you have to head over to the website of our sponsor, and that is Discount Comic Book Service. So go to dcbservice.com, or you can even check out their sister company, In Stock Trades.
And if you go to In Stock Trades, you will see that they still have a lot of Black Friday, Cyber Monday deals up. Way too many for us to go into here on the podcast, but check them out at In Stock Trades. You'll see the little banners that go by. There are some great deals to be had, so get them while you can.
Yeah, who knows how long that sale will go up. I have to check that out myself. But if you're someone who prefers to get your books through Amazon.com, well, you can help us out by going to our website, comicsalternative.com/Amazon, and you will find a banner to click through to get your stuff on Amazon. Everything you get on Amazon, books or otherwise, we get, through that click-through, we get a little kickback. So we appreciate that. We loves the kickback.
Yes, we do.
Yeah. And then after you do get your comics at one of those places, get in touch with us and let us know what you're going to be reading. If you go to the website, comicsalternative.com, you'll find that you can send us a voice recording through the wonders of SpeakPipe. Or you can call us the old-fashioned way. Our phone number is 415-3-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427.
And if you'd like to catch up on everything that we're up to as far as the podcast and the blog, the best way to do that is to follow us on Twitter. And we are at the number 2 guys with PhDs. Check us out, and we sure appreciate everybody that retweets our tweets.
That's right. You can also email us. We're 2guys@comicsalternative.com. You can reach me at Derek@comicsalternative.com. And Andy, how can they get in touch with you?
You can reach me at Wolverton@comicsalternative.com.
We're also on Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, Google+, Pinterest, and YouTube. You can subscribe to the podcast through iTunes, you can stream us on Stitcher, and you can find us on TuneIn, but you can find every single one of our episodes as well as our reviews and the comics-related commentary at our website, comicsalternative.com.
Yep, all kinds of ways to find out what we're up to and let us know how we're doing.
Yes. So, Andy, I know you and I will definitely be in communication throughout this month, but I think this is the last episode you and I will be on together for 2015.
Wow. It's gone by fast.
Yeah.
It's been a quick year.
Yeah. So, since I'm not going to be recording with you before the new year, you have a nice holiday.
Hey, you too, Derek.
And we'll be back next week. Until then, I'm Derek.
And I'm Andy.
See you later.